Good morning and welcome to another exciting Day 4, number 68 with the man, Frank Scalish. How's it going, Frank? If you're listening, let me get this right out of the way first. If you're listening live, for the viewers, sorry for the delay, school buses, no children on board. I guess they got in a drag racing deal on the interstate. Tangled up, blocked the interstate. Everyone was okay. There's no ambulances. Anyway, I got stuck in between the accident exit and the exit that they started diverting traffic to. So when the semis shut their engines off and the helicopters are overhead, no bueno, Uncle Frank.
You knew you were in for a wait. A small wait. But that's okay.
I was in for a small wait. Great show today. It's all, you've done blueback herring. You've done other species of bait, but something that is prolific? Is that a word? Prolific?
Prolific is good.
Are they coast to coast? This bait fish species that you're going to break down today?
Yes, they are. Unlike the threadfin shad, which is predominantly in the southern climates, which I will make a small reference to those later.
Gizzard shad today. All about the gizzard.
Shad. Yeah.
I'm excited because I'm very excited for this show because I often see gizzard shad. You know, they're the ones that they go streaking by the boat and porpoise, and you see them and they're moving really fast. But I don't really know how to target fish that are keying on the gizzard shad outside of the big swim bait or how they move. I'm not. Threadfin's easy. It's like, look, there's big schools of them. There's fish here, but gizzards are more.
Yeah, they roam like crazy. We'll get in detail on that. In a little bit.
Awesome. But yeah, so everything's fine. In studio a little late.
That's okay. Hey, better. You know what? Sometimes waiting is better.
It was, and the BTL Day 4 listeners all stayed on, had a healthy discussion on the message board.
Perfect.
And we're good to go. I was perusing Instagram again while I was in standstill traffic and saw more pictures of you holding big fish. Which therefore leads to a Day 4 opening story of how
big fish.
You said, "Hey, this is Instagram worthy."
So here's how it. You guys are gonna just. Well, I won't bring my boat into the picture on this show.
More stuff with the rig.
The motor. I finally got it worked out. I have a really good Mercury tech on it, and turns out it was a fuel rail that went bad. So Tuesday I'm going to bring it in. They're going to look it up, do all the compression tests. What?
Oh, it's never ending.
Wait, yeah.
With your rig.
It's a negative annuity. It's never ending because here, I'll tell you why. The person that I purchased the boat from literally never used it. He had it. It's an 09 Legend Alpha 211. It's not the boat, it's the motor actually. He had 300 hours on it, which if you do 09 to 2 years ago, he put 29 hours a year on it. So that's like hardly ever using it. So what happens is, things can go awry, and I just happened to get it when everything needed to start being replaced.
So he sold it at the right time is what you're
saying. He got rid of it at the most opportunistic time you could. Even though the motor's young and doesn't have a lot of hours on it, it still needs to be upkept. And so if you ignore things, then they all start to go at once. It's like this, dude. When you go to the store and you buy a washing machine and a dryer, and you go, I'm going to get them both together. Oh, look, they look so nice. We'll buy both at the same time. Well, guess what happens? They both start breaking down at the same time. Yeah. And so that's kind of where I'm at with this outboard. And, I've never had this much issues in my life. I've run Mercuries most of my life and never had this kind of problem. But I always really kept up with my motors. So anyway, so we are digressing. So
just say you went out and you caught some fish though.
Oh yeah. So I had to choose a lake that I didn't have to use my outboard on. And so I took a smaller body of water, one that I can get around on the trolling motor, and try to figure something out. So Tuesday I had gone out, and here's what's going on here. Okay, the major spawn is pretty much over on the inland lakes, not Lake Erie. Lake Erie's setting up for spawning, but the major spawn on the inland lakes is pretty much done. So we're almost pure post spawn on some of our inland lakes. So Matt always talks about dinking and dunking on the show, and basically dinking and dunking are their finesse techniques.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There is a perfect time of year for certain finesse techniques that lends itself to catching large fish. One of those times is the post spawn, because the big females are off the beds. They're tired. They're spent from spawning. They're not really feeding up yet. They're kind of in a limbo land. You know what I mean? They're not on summer patterns. So they're hanging out near those spawning areas, but not in the spawning areas, and they're not out on summer structure yet. This is the perfect time for some of these finesse techniques, because you're fishing for a very non-aggressive bass. And here, so Tuesday I went out because I hadn't seen the lake in a while. So I went out to see what stages the fish were in. It was very windy and it was very difficult. I was fishing a Ned rig with a 5-inch custom colored Yum Dinger. Okay. And as you all know, that Ned rig is a very light presentation, and this particular lake has grass in it. So I couldn't go to a super heavy rig because I needed to be able to snatch it through the grass, have it lay on top of the grass, roll down the grass edges without hanging up all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I started my search, and I really wasn't doing well. This was Tuesday. I really didn't start the day out on the right foot. It took me about a half hour, and then I finally caught one almost 3 pounds. And the minute I hooked it, by the time I landed it and unhooked it and let it go, I had 3 or 4 boats come within 20 yards of me and start fishing all over the place. So I left.
You didn't say anything? You didn't start growling?
Nah, I got to be careful. So I left that area and I started poking around, and I was catching fish, but I would get one here and one there. And I was still putting pieces of the puzzle together because I wasn't sure how deep the fish were yet. I knew the spawn is over, but there's still some spawning. So when I say the spawn's over and then I say there's still some spawning, it sounds ridiculous, but it's not, because the main stuff is done. So you have to realize you're going to find spawners here probably all the way to the end of June. A few, okay, but for the most part, the main body is done. So anyhow, the day's progressing. It's kind of miserable, but not terribly miserable. So it's a little tough to fish, but I started to zone in on a depth range, and then started to zone in on certain types of structural elements. And by the end of the day, I had found a couple of places that had fish stacked up on them. So I left the lake and came home, because I didn't want to pound on these fish, because I'm doing a series of finesse fishing series on the bait school videos on LureNet YouTube. So I left it.
So you're dialed in.
I think I am. Okay, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
So yesterday we go film, and the wind is way worse than it was. I mean, like way worse. And I'm having some issues maintaining, because you cast out with that light Ned rig and you get a big wind bow in your line. Okay. The minute you get the wind bow in your line, you're not working that bait properly because the wind's blowing it. So
parachuting it. Basically.
Yeah, it's swimming. And so I have to position the boat where I can make a cast, so I'm bringing it directly to me. Boat positioning is a problem at that point. But needless to say, smoke their brains out. I mean, absolutely smoke their brains out. And, you know, I'm to the point where if I look at a lake watercolor, I can pretty much tell what color soft plastic I need to throw. And this comes with experience on the water. You see a certain watercolor looks like this, you're going to throw these colors. Certain watercolor looks like that, you're going to throw those colors. So I kind of narrowed it down to 2 colors when I got there, and both colors caught fish, but one of the custom colors, I was throwing green clown and GB haze. The water was clear. Um, it has perch, bluegill, crappie, shad as a forage base. So what I wound up doing was I took GB haze because that is more creaturistic or bluegill-ish.
There it is, right there.
And then I took green clown, which is insanely perchish.
Is it green gill or green clown? Green clown. There it is, right there. Boom.
This bait looks just like a perch. Now, what you don't see in this picture is the underside of that bait is a yellowish orangey color, but not hard or vibrant. It's muted. It's a very good clear water color, especially in the northern lakes where you have perch present. And so those are the 2 color choices that I chose. And when I went out, so here's the key. Okay, God, I don't want to give all this up because the video is going to come out.
Well, you don't have to. You can just tease it.
Okay, so I'm teasing it.
You're teasing the video.
In the video, you're going to see what locations to look for, what depths to look for, and exactly how to fish this thing. Now, I always tell you guys I fished that 5-inch on a Ned head, and I get some flack for that. Okay. But it moves and undulates in a way that the short ones don't. Because when you snap it through the grass or you swim it, the whole yum dinger flicks and vibrates, it flicks and swims. And that's the kind of action that I want, especially when I'm fishing for largemouth. So you'll see when the video breaks, the real details on how and why and what you want to do to fish this thing. And you can catch them all summer long doing this. You just have to remember you're going to start moving out with the fish, and that's pretty much it. But yeah, so it was fantastic. Our best 5 was just under 20 pounds. That was our best limit. Our second best limit was probably around 18, and then our third best limit was probably around 15.
I've got an issue with this calling it a Ned rig, Frank. As a finesse fisherman, isn't that a jig head worm?
Well,
with a
yes.
5-inch?
Well, yeah, but you know what's crazy is the jig head worm was the first original Ned rig, but nobody calls it a jig head worm. I mean, realistically, the Ned rig is nothing more than a jig head worm. Honestly. I mean, we've been fishing that jig head thing for years, and somebody came out and called it a Ned head.
Ned did.
Yeah, Ned did.
Ned, no, he did. I think it's Ned Cahill up in Kansas with the shorter thing. But it's a totally different presentation with the short stubby. If you had taken that dinger and cut it just below the collar,
right,
it would have then been a 2.5, 3-inch presentation. You would have gotten no action under the water on it.
Right, because the key with the short Ned rigs, let's call them the real Ned rig. Okay. When you cast it out and you're fishing deep water and maybe you're fishing a structural element, like even on Lake Erie for smallmouth and stuff, a lot of times you're fishing 15 to 25 feet deep. As that little one drops, it swims and helicopters down. A lot of your smallmouth bites come as it's falling. They see it, they come up and get it, and it's spiraling down. Okay, the 5-inch dinger will spiral, but it spirals in a much slower rate. But the key to the 5-inch dinger is when you shake it and you snap it up through the grass, It swims and darts like crazy. It doesn't fall in the same
Ah.
place twice. And that's where most of the bites occur. Well, the post spawn bite is so, dude, it's so ridiculous because you never felt, boom, you know how when you're fishing the net head, boom, all of a
Yep.
sudden you're like, oh yeah, there he is. Never. All of a sudden you're thinking you're shaking it through some grass and your line gets a little sluggish. That's how every single bite was. You didn't feel one. If you caught a little tiny one, you felt it. The big giant post spawn females didn't even feel them, dude. I mean, you just be moving it and all of a sudden it gets kind of mushy and you reel down and you're like, oh, there he is. You know what I mean?
How do you think they're eating that, Frank, when you do feel a distinct dunk and then as opposed to a weight bite where it is? What do you think the difference is that doesn't allow you to feel them pick up that bait?
I think it's the neutrality of a post spawn female. I think she's not in a negative mode. She's in a neutral mode. And so what happens is I even caught some just dead stick in it. Like I come through some grass, I shake it, and then I just leave it there. And then I go to move it again and she's on it. You know what I mean? So I think it's just that neutral feeding mode as opposed to when they're like in the summertime when I fish it, they smoke it. They smash it. They kill it. And half the time when I pop it through the grass, they annihilate it. Yesterday and the day before, it was very slow, very subtle, very meticulous. And you had to be patient. You had to be very patient. But it paid off. I mean, it paid off because I went out. See, the problem is I went out to target females and I had found a bunch of, I was catching some males. But when I was catching the small males, I wasn't catching any big fish. So I kept moving. That's how I was practicing for this thing. I kept moving until I figured out where these females wanted to be. And it was weird because there was only a handful, and I mean a small handful of places where I found the big females in areas, in areas where I can catch and target a better class of bass. So,
because it's hard for that technique if you're not confident that you're around fish,
100%.
because you're not. It's hard to find them. This is a technique, and I'm sure you'll go through this on the LureNet YouTube channel when it comes out next week. But this is once you have identified where the fish are holding, you're now slowing down and methodically picking apart. It's not a search bait.
No, see, and no, dude. You are so accurate with that.
It involves a spinning rod. So,
well, yeah. If you exactly, you'd have been so proud of me.
You want tips on me on how to catch above average fish on a bait caster? I'm not your man.
Dude, you'd have been so proud of me. It's windy. I'm tying FG gnats out there. I'm doing all this stuff. But yeah, you're 100%. It's not a search tool. And if you think you're gonna pick up a Ned style bait and go searching, you're going to waste the whole day, because that's not. So what happened was when I was practicing, I didn't put the Ned down, even though it's a tough search tool. But what I did was I started looking at certain areas of the lakes, certain structural elements, certain depth ranges, and I picked it apart. A lot like I talked to you guys about breaking down a lake. I did the same thing, knowing full well that these fish were spawning a couple weeks ago, and now the spawn is winding down. So I started out where they spawn and started working my way out from there until I figured it out. Once I figured it out, I just started running to places that met that pattern. If I caught a big one, I left it. If I caught little ones, I kept catching them, and then I would leave. You know what I mean? And so what wound up happening through the course of the day, I narrowed it down to a small handful of spots where I knew I could catch big fish. Not too dissimilar than practicing for a tournament. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, it's not a tool you're going to go practice like mad for and cover monumental amounts of water until you start narrowing things down and you start to see what you need to look for. Then you could start bopping around and doing your thing.
I don't think we've ever actually shown this, but we always talk about the LureNet YouTube channel. And if you don't have your fix of day 4, here's the channel. I mean, all these are all you. These are all I mean, you put out 2 a week, basically.
Well, yeah, a
One or
little,
two a week, but you can go back through all
yeah,
these videos and watch all of the tips and tactics that you've come out with. I mean, that's all you right there.
right. And it's, this spring started out a little slow with the videos, just basically because I was off and on the water with the motor issues for a while, and so it's got a slow start, but we're ramping up now. We're getting it ramped up right now, so we'll
Well,
be
I will
good.
be looking forward to the finesse series, because I did notice in that post you had an eye of your rod in the last photo where you were showing
Oh
the
yeah,
bait, and I noticed that it was the lowest eye on a spinning rod.
exactly.
And I was like, oh, that piqued my interest there, Frank.
Well, see,
So,
and I did that shot on purpose. We did that on purpose to show that it was not, in fact, a baitcaster.
good stuff. I had something interesting go down this past week, and I thought that I might be able to get a little bit of advice from you.
Uh-oh.
Fished a lake in Oklahoma, Keystone, and it's got a lot of 2 to 4 pounders in it. Really healthy lake, close to Tulsa. It kind of cycles, but the water was 10 feet high. It was 8 foot, and it was dropping. We were catching them flipping the middle of bushes, beanie bushes, buckbrush, whatever you want to call it, but
Right
not
in
like
this.
rows, isolated bushes where you could flip in the center. And I was using just a half ounce Texas rig, and I probably had 15 to 20 bites over the course of the day between us in it. Could not catch a fish over 2.5 pounds. Now, we weren't catching little ones, but I went from like a 6-inch creature bait, a beaver style bait, a small cross style bait. I kept trying, and we were identifying different types, but we could not get over that 2.5 pound mark. We ended up weighing in 5 for 1250 on the dot. Like literally the big fish that we weighed, that everybody weighs, ours was 271.
Gotcha.
That's 5 2.5 pounders, and we were calling 2.5s. And it's not like there's very few 2 3/4, 3, 3.5, 4s. We weighed in 2370 this spring out there, and there's a lot of 4 to 3.5, 4 pounders. And I was thinking, I wonder what Uncle Frank would do to try to get a bigger bite when you're catching fish, but they all seem to be cookie cutters.
Yeah, there's more than 2 things, but that's a really great story, because the bigger fish might have not been in bushes. They might have been on hardwoods. It could have been the type of bushes you were fishing, those scrubby ones with all the branches. You're dead on the money. You got to go right down the middle of it, because they get right to the stalk of that tree, and they use the branches as cover. But what I found is that if I'm flipping bush tops, like really, buck brush and real scrubby stuff, and I'm only catching smaller fish, the big ones are relating to something completely different, because otherwise you would have caught a few big ones in the mix. And the fact that you didn't means something may have been overlooked. Maybe the big ones wanted to be in blowdowns, you know what I mean, where they had the big trunk, they can get up against that trunk, or conversely, they might have been hanging in front of those transitional areas right on that break line.
Original bank line.
Yeah. Was the
water
water
was 8 foot high? And
was
muddy.
the water muddy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they were the quality fish to where we
you keep going.
I was fishing with the bush flipping master in Oklahoma too. He's been doing it for like 30 years. It was awesome, but it was just, they were just enough, you know what I mean? Like, it was like, oh, if we catch 20, there's got to be a 4 pounder in there. But it was just over and over and over, the exact same size fish. So that's interesting, though. We did not say, okay, we're going to fish something completely different in the vicinity because those bigger fish might have pulled out there. I think, maybe a chatterbait, let it get down to the bottom on the outside on the original bank line, or target more the willows that were in the water that had a hardwood trunk. Probably would have been.
Yeah, because I mean, I've seen that. I've seen that on lakes here where they choose a wood source, the bigger ones, and you catch a lot of fish in the bush tops, but the minute you get to a big piece of wood, you catch a big fish. Grand Lake, same thing. When I was fishing Grand Lake, they wanted big lumber and leaning. If I found big lumber and leaning, I caught a big one. If I fished willow tops, I caught little ones. The minute I got a big piece of lumber that leaned over the water, big fish. And so you kind of narrow it down that way, because there's a pattern within a pattern on almost everything. It's kind of
the
crazy.
next Day 4 shirt needs to just say Big Lumber with the Day 4 logo. Honestly, I think I like that.
Yeah,
I also want to
go
point
down that
out,
road.
I think this is probably the first time in the history of Day 4 that you went out and caught him this week. I caught him this week.
Yeah.
And Mark went out and had one of the top 5 days of his life this week.
Mark smashed him.
He smashed him so much that he does not even, I did not know he knew how to use the FaceTime feature on his phone.
Oh, he figured it out.
He FaceTimed me
Me too.
from the lake just to rub it in even more.
Yeah, well, when he caught a 9, he got a 9. They caught some big fish, dude.
I do not think it was a 9.
I'm not gonna. I can't tell from
the photograph. I think it was a 7+.
And that's very
a 9
possible.
is a 9 is a beast, Frank.
It's a chunk.
When you catch a 9, you think it's a 12. And I've only caught like 3 9s. You know, I've caught 2 9s and 3 over 10 in my whole life. But every time I catch one, heck, every time I hook one over 8, which isn't that often, when it comes up, I'm like, double digit right off the hopper.
Dude, you know what? I've never caught a 9-pounder.
You've never?
Oh, no! I take
have?
that back. No, I take that back. I did on a small lake in Arkansas swimming a jig. I plowed them, dude.
Really?
Yeah, but in a tournament scenario, the biggest largemouth I've ever weighed is 8.5 pounds.
That's still a big one. We do have photo evidence. It does look big. Maybe next Thursday we can get the photo loaded up, and then we'll let the BTL listeners
you know what's
see.
funny? He caught him on a bomber deep flat A.
Yeah.
That bait where you guys live is something else. It's something else. Speaking of bomber, guys, remember the Capital Bass Talk discount code literally goes on until the 31st of this month. So you have like 4 days left to take advantage of that. Also, the bulk bundles you can take advantage of. The bulk bundles are already discounted, so the discount code won't apply to the bulk bundles. You got to check out those Yum custom colors on the 5-inch dingers because, dude, they're amazing. I've been absolutely throttling them on some of those new colors. So you got to take a peek at those as well.
Good stuff. All right. Let's get to the topic of the hour, which is the elusive and delicious Gizzard Shad.
The often oily and stinky Gizzard Shad. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'll just dive into this, and it's not going to be too complicated because Gizzard Shad are not really that complicated. They do have migrations. I will talk about that, but let's break it down. First of all, a Gizzard Shad can grow up to 16 inches long. I don't know if you've ever seen them that big, but on the Great Lakes, they are gigantic. I mean, we have them. Basically, they reach sexual maturity at 2 to 3 years old, and they live 5 to 7 years. Okay. The spawning, and we're going to get detailed into the spawning and stuff like that later on. They spawn usually May through June. They're random spawners. They're planktivores. Okay. Yes, that is the elusive Gizzard Shad right there. They're planktivores. And they also, and this is something that I didn't really know about Gizzard Shad, but it's kind of important. They feed heavy on the detritus found on the bottom sediments of a lake. I think like that's 13% of their feeding is spent rummaging around on the bottom, eating the garbage and the decaying debris that settles on the bottom. Which is very kind of unique if you think about it, because they're actually plankton eaters. Okay, so that's kind of unique, and they feed on that stuff more than 13% of the time. So it's like they eat 3 times their body weight a day in that stuff. Which, think about, because if you're slow rolling a chatterbait bouncing it off the bottom.
Oh.
If you're slow rolling a spinner bait where you're slow rolling it, dragging it off the bottom, if these gizzard shad are spending 13% of their life on the bottom eating crap, no pun intended, that's those representations. Obviously, everybody knows crankbait. Okay. So we'll just go through this. Okay. They live in open water, especially during the summer. Not too uncommon than blueback herring. They migrate up the rivers in the fall and winter. Okay. Um, Here's the thing. Gizzard shad can live in filthy, dirty, silty water. Okay. Now, we'll take a time out here and revert back to the blueback herring show. Blueback herring cannot tolerate dirty water. They will die in dirty water. So now you're going to see on lakes that have both species, now you're going to see and understand when you're targeting the bluebacks, you stay in front of the mud line. When you're targeting fish that are on gizzard shad, you're going into the mud because they spend their time in the dirty water. They actually like it, to be honest with you. Usually a gizzard shad avoids the surface when it's sunny. They go down, which is why, think about this, which is why summer crankbait fishing is so fantastic on gizzard shad lakes, especially when the sun is out. Because when the sun's out, it pushes the shad down. This is something that I constantly look for when I structure fish as bait balls relating to a certain depth range. So here's how I'll break that down. I'll break that down for you real simply. So remember the blueback herring show, when the sun comes out, bluebacks come to the top. When the sun comes out, gizzard shad go down. This is important to know because if you're on a lake that has a majority population of gizzard shad, the first thing I do when I'm structure fishing a lake, I have my eyes glued on my locators constantly. So when I launch the boat and I'm idling away from the boat launch, for example, and you come out of the creek or you come out of your launch area, you get a drop and you get a drop in contours. Let's say I see balls of bait in 16 feet of water. That's the big clue up here that says I need to look at structure that comes up to 16 feet deep. Because when the sun comes out and those shad go down, they're suspending at 16 feet. Any hard structure that comes up to 16 feet is going to be an ambush point for the bass to attack these gizzard shad. All right. So that's how I determine on gizzard shad lakes how deep I'm going to fish. I'll see the bait fish at a certain depth range and know that's where my target is. So what happens now, guys, is you can eliminate a lot of unproductive water just by paying attention to your locator, providing there's gizzard shad on the lake that you're fishing. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of the thing. So now let's talk about some major shad. I'll call them events. Okay, I'm going to call them events because shad have a tendency to roam a lot. They're also plankton eaters. The biggest shad. There's two really huge shad movement times a year. One is the fall migrations to the back of the creeks. Everybody knows on these particular gizzard shad lakes, once the fall rolls around, you got to start running to the backs of the creeks because that's where all the gizzard shad are going. Now, if like on Lake Erie and some of the Great Lakes that have gizzard shad, they make the same migrations. They come up the rivers, they go in the estuaries, and they go in marinas off the Great Lakes. For whatever the reason, that's their migration route on the Great Lakes. Like you could go there at ice out off of Lake Erie and all the other Great Lakes. You could go after ice out, go into certain marinas, and there's literally 3 feet of dead shad on the bottom of the lake because they migrate in mass into these areas. Well, if you have a super cold water episode there's a huge die-off. Gizzard shad are notorious for die-offs, okay? But the gizzard shad can tolerate way colder water than, for example, a threadfin shad. That's why threadfin don't live up here, okay? Threadfin shad could barely survive in water below 40 degrees. So that's the difference. Now, you remember, for location purposes, we talked about 3 variations in bass. You have your resident creek fish, bass, that live up the creeks all year long, never leave them. You have your main lake resident fish that live on the main lake forever, never really leave the main lake. And then you have your pelagic bass that do nothing but follow these bait fish through their entire movement, be it summer suspending in the middle of the creek channels, going up the creeks in the fall, or following them on their shad spawn events, which leads us to the second major event in a shad's life, and that's the shad spawn. Now, this is kind of detailed because the shad spawn, in my opinion, is very important. Okay, so what happens is shad are random spawners, and what I mean by that is they don't make nests. They don't do things that bottom spawning fish do. They don't behave the same way. They're open water spawners. They literally spawn in the open water. The eggs are released. The male fertilizes the eggs trickle down to the bottom, get caught in the current, float around. Anything that egg hits, it sticks to, which is important to know, because if you think about it, they're going to spawn over grass flats. They're going to spawn over, they like gradual transitional banks, okay, with rock on it. They'll spawn over top of that. The eggs fall down, stick to the rocks. They spawn over these grass flats, gradual transitioning now, nothing super deep going into the basin, okay?
Long tapering points with the glide baits were massively key on Lake Fork.
100%.
Sorry, didn't mean to sidetrack you. That makes
No,
sense.
but that's
because the gizzard shad were up there spawning, dropping it with a hard bottom, so that's why they were up there.
Now, not only that, they spawn over submerged timber, because as the eggs fall, they stick to the branches and they stick to the submerged timber, keeping them off the sediment on the bottom, keeping them in the current. And that's basically what they do. So now, if you know this is so important for fishing, okay? Because like everybody knows the shad spawn's going in, but where do you target fish that spawn in open water? Well, now you know, because they're not going to spawn over the basin of the lake. They're going to spawn over gradual transitioning banks, flats, not super deep flats, okay? Shallower flats, grass beds that gradually taper down, okay? And submerged timber. So this narrows your search down. So if you look at that fork tournament that went on, that's exactly how they were catching those fish. Got over those,
Okay, so I'm going to go back to the Bassmaster Open on Pickwick last year. And I don't want to get into the details of who or what, but there was a guy who absolutely smashed him on day one. And he said he caught him on a shad spawn. Well, I drove past him that morning, going to my spot, and I saw him. And I was like, I wonder what he's doing out there. Well, he comes in, he gives this interview about how he's catching him on a shad spawn. He was over like 25, 30 foot of water at the end of like a deal with stuff underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, how is he catching him on a shad spawn?
Right.
That's what was going on there.
That's
he probably
exactly
caught bigger ones because it was gizzard shad instead of little thread fins.
Correct.
And those fish were out there in open water, and those gizzards were spawning out there. So he literally like understood the cycle of how that worked and what was going on, and that's why he could throw a 5-6 inch swim bait on a half ounce head
and catch big fish.
Him on a shad spawn in something that typically
and
that's why it died after the first hour.
Well, yeah, exactly. So you see, by understanding your bait fish, you're understanding bass positioning.
Yeah.
It goes back to, it goes back to researching what the bass feed on to become a better bass fisherman. The other thing that happens with gizzard shad, now I'm not going to call this a major bait fish movement because it's not a major bait fish movement. It just happens. Towards summer and end of summer, a lot of the gizzard shad start to get ball up in mass over main river creek channels. But the best places are where the main river creek channel meets the main river channel meets a secondary creek channel where the two channels intersect each other. Those intersections, those are usually going to be closer to the creek mouths, but over deep water, suspending. That's when you'll see guys, and it's late summer, early fall in some places, but mostly late-ish summer. They ball up in these places. That's when you see guys like on Kerr Reservoir, perfect example. You'll see guys with jigging spoons or flutter spoons, and it looks like they're in the middle of the lake fishing who knows what. They're running these spoons through these suspending shad, and they're catching the pelagics. And most of your pelagic chasers, when it comes to largemouth bass, most of your pelagic chasers are 3 to 4 pounders, 3 to 5 pounders. You're not going to usually catch tiny bass doing that. You're really going to appeal to a better bite at that point. But that's gizzard shad. I mean, they're not difficult. They're really not difficult.
You mentioned something that I think is important. You might have mentioned it one time before, but it's something that I always overlook. And you mentioned it in this show, and I drew a little deal, which was, and what time of the year is it where you, okay, I'm going to put my boat in on the water. I know that there's a population of gizzard shad in there. I'm noticing as I idle around on my 2D that I'm over 25 foot of water, and I'm seeing what I believe are schools, balls of gizzard shad in 16 foot of water. And it seems to be consistent, whether I idle over 35 foot of water, whether I idle over 20 foot of water, it's in 16.
That's the beauty part about them.
This is the key. This is key, and you mentioned it, and I think this is... So what I want to do then is say, okay, and are they there because of the oxygen level, the thermocline, because something is right, that's where they're thriving, that's where they're just the most comfortable right then.
Right.
So
food,
I want to look at my chip, and I want to start idling areas that are 14 to 18 foot deep.
Yep.
And then I want to look for hard pieces of structure that are on the bottom that top out right around that 15, 16 foot mark. And that then allows the bass, whether they're bass that are pelagic bass that are using it opportunistically because they're ambushing the bait fish that are in that section, or whether they live on that piece of cover and the bait fish are coming to them.
Right.
I now, instead of randomly trying to catch these fish that are, or bass that are chasing these 16, I can now have a hard piece of cover that I have found that I know have bass on, and it's in the depth that the bait fish are at. Right. So I'm going in. Okay, that I think that's super important.
Okay, so now remember when we did the blueback herring piece, we talked about main lake bass that spend their entire lives living on the main lake.
Yeah.
We talked about the pelagic bass that roam with those shad.
And the intersection of the two is the juice.
It's the overlap.
Yeah.
That's what happens. You have these main lake residents that are living on this structure. Okay, they're going to move up and down on these structural elements based on where the shad are, but the pelagics intercept these main lakers at the same time under those conditions. So now you're putting yourself in front of a higher percentage.
And that's why sometimes you can roll up on a pile and whack, 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 whack.
Yep.
And sometimes it lasts for days and days because you have fresh fish that are going in. The bait fish are all at that level under the circumstances. I understand. There's bluegill, there's crawfish, there's other variables.
Right.
When you're under this deal, you roll up, let's say you throw a fat-free shad through it. There's one. You can go back days and days, and then one day they'll be gone. You go back, I don't
That's
know
right.
where they went. That's because something happened in that environment that those bait fish moved off, and now you just have the resident fish, most likely, which you've plucked off in the previous days if you're fishing multiple days, but you don't have a fresh supply of the pelagics that are coming in and keying on those bait fish because the bait
Correct.
fish have moved on to a different depth, a different area for some unknown reason.
Right. And so when that happens, okay, then I'm idling around looking for suspending shad again.
Seeing what
Because
depth they're at.
right, because what if they came up higher? What if they went down deeper? And
Good
so then
stuff.
I'll retarget my structure areas accordingly. I think with the gizzard shad, I think one of the most overlooked. It's not. I'm going to call it. I will call it a mistake. I think one of the biggest mistake anglers make is they don't trust what their depth finder shows them. I'm always looking for suspending bait fish because suspending bait fish, especially on gizzard shad lakes, are going to tell me where I need to concentrate once the fish are done spawning and they get into their summer movements. And I can take that from literally from post spawn, follow them out to summer, and then take that all the way to fall. And then once fall comes around, then obviously there's another migration, and then you're changing again. But that's the whole key to gizzard shad fisheries, which is why the crankbait just is primo on gizzard shad lakes. And
how big's too? Oh, sorry.
And remember that the gizzard shad also feeds on the bottom debris 13% of its life, which brings the Carolina rig into play, bouncing around on the bottom, moving around on the bottom. These bass are accustomed to this. These feeding behaviors. That's how they live.
So if you're like, I don't have much success. I don't have much confidence in this. You go out this time of year. You've got post-spawn fish that are moving off the bank to their offshore haunts. You're identifying the depth that the bait fish are in. You're finding structure on the bottom that intersects with that depth, and then using how they feed, because they're most vulnerable when they're feeding because they're obviously not paying attention to what's coming from above them. Then using a crankbait, a bottom bouncing lure, something that imitates that on that structure at the right depth, and that's a really good starting spot to take any fishery and be able to target gizzard shad eating fish in it, which are typically bigger than your average size fish because gizzard shad are pretty big.
Frank. They're big. They're bulky. They're not as small as threadfin, and blueback herring are longer and more slender. The gizzard shad's kind of a robust bait fish as far
can
as
they get too big? Goes. Can you find schools of gizzard shad that are
100%
way too? And how do you determine that? How do you determine their gizzard shad on your graph? How do you determine the size of the gizzard shad?
Okay, so here's the crazy thing. When bass are feeding on gizzard shad, they will absolutely 100% show a size preference to the shad they're eating. This is where your crankbait selection is critical. Okay, if they're eating 3 to 4 inch gizzard shad, then you're going to be throwing crankbaits that their bodies, not body and bill, just the body, like a fat free or a DD22, is over 3 inches long. Okay, you want to focus in on the same size that they're feeding on. I've seen this a million times, especially on the Ohio River, where they're keying in on little 2-inch gizzard shad. And if you're throwing anything, a spinnerbait, for example, with big giant number 5 willow leaves and stuff, you're not even getting a sniff. The minute you downsize your blades, you start crashing them because their bass are so specific when they're feeding on gizzard shad. They're so specific on the size they want and what they're targeting, where if the bass are eating 2-inch gizzard shad and a 5-inch gizzard shad swimming around, he's safe. He's not even going to get eaten probably because they're keying in on the size class. And so that's what you want to pay attention to. If you catch a bass, here's the best thing. When you catch one, and you get them in your boat and they regurgitate a shad, the first thing I do is look how big that shad they threw up was. And then I'm switching to that size. color will determine later, because you're going to experiment with color. You're going to throw a natural pattern, natural shad pattern, a hot shad pattern, because they're going to take one better than the other.
Let me ask you this, and I'm just spitballing here, but this just came to my mind, Frank. Is that why a big worm starts to work really well in the post-spawn and going into the summertime? Because you're talking 8 to 10 inches, 12 inches, possibly a little bit of girth to it, rooting around on the bottom through the brush piles with a wavy tail on it. Now, I understand it doesn't have the tallness there, but that's
Right.
a big profile on the bottom that looks like it's kind of feeding around down there, and it's a notorious big fish bait.
It is a
Do they think
notorious big fish bait.
blue fleck ribbon-tail worm or a plum? Because a lot of times they'll get a pinkish hue to their bellies, especially in the warmer water, a reddish hue as they do. A lot of those fish that are big worm eaters potentially think that they're feeding gizzard shad.
See, now I can't verify. I cannot. I can't.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can't accept nor deny that statement because I don't know what they think that 10-inch worm is.
It makes sense though. It's big. It's the size of a
does.
gizzard shad. I mean, you're not dealing with 10-inch worms down there. I understand you can go around and around, but I had never thought of a big worm as a gizzard shad representation. But the more you talk about the locations, how they feed, what they are, the more I think a red shad big worm on the bottom in the summertime might be interpreted as in their brains as an opportunity to eat a gizzard shad.
And it could very well be, because remember, if that shad is spending 13% of its life nose down, rooting on the bottom, that's exactly what it could be. Now, I can't say that's exactly what they think a 10-inch worm is, because let's remember one thing above all. Bass are opportunistic predators. So if they're somewhere and something falls in front of them, they're going to eat it, because that's just what they do.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's just what they do. But if you're in the right areas and and look,
that's
a
what
10-inch
I'm going with. They think it's a gizzard shad.
And a 10-inch, well, here, look, a 10-inch ribbon tail. The ribbon tail moves a lot. It undulates in the water. If it's got a little bit of flash to it, okay. If you're fishing in immature grass and that ribbon tail is only sticking up about yay high and they see that flashy tail, they could easily assume it's a shad picking stuff off the bottom and go down there and get it. I can't say for sure they think the 10-inch ribbon tail is a shad, but I can tell you what, if you're catching them, you're in the right place.
That's good stuff.
Yeah, but see, the shad are way gizzard shad are way less complicated than blueback herring. Way less complicated.
How often do they move? Like the bluebacks move a lot.
Yeah, bluebacks.
Do the gizzard shad move as much as the bluebacks, or are they more homely?
No, they're true pelagics. They roam all over the place too. They follow the plankton. They do what they do, but a gizzard shad can tolerate dirtier water. They don't shy away from it. They can live in silty water. Actually, a gizzard shad's perfect habitat is a shallow, dirty, fertile lake. That's their ultimate habitat, and they can reproduce like mad, and so you have these huge shad populations. They can explode in population under the right conditions. So that's it. Now, deeper, clear lakes, shad don't do as well. It's just not their optimum conditions. They can live in them, but the population's going to be way in check because they can explode because the conditions aren't optimal for them. Where the shallower, dirtier lakes is like primo. It's primo for them.
Were you going to go into maybe some specific bait options? Because I'm thinking, are you going like Yum Money Minnow? Are you going fat-free shad? Are you going spinner bait? Like, what are just some really good all-around gizzard shad representation?
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to talk swim baits, for example, I go Scottsboro, Money Minnow, In those conditions. Now you can fish them different ways. You can fish them with the belly weighted hook. You can fish them on a jig head. But we're just talking about shad representatives. Spinner baits is always a good bet, especially if the wind's blowing, especially if you got off-color dirty water. The shad are going to be in that stuff. They're not going to shy away, like with a blueback won't go in that. They can't live in that. So that's when the spinnerbait becomes effective. Square bills, the Norman Fat Boy, regular crankbaits. My two all-time favorite structure fishing crankbaits is a DD22 and a Fat Free Shad 7. It's the perfect size. It gets down to the right depths. They're fantastic gizzard shad imitators. They're quite frankly, they're just fantastic bait fish imitators. If the gizzard shad are there, they look the same. That's really what I'm going for when the shad moves shallow, like when they migrate in the fall. Rattle baits, fantastic. Small spinner baits, fantastic. Square bills, fantastic. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's really, kind of what bait choices I'm looking at. Carolina rigging bait choices. I'll throw spine craw with some flake in it. I'll throw ribbon tail worms. You know what I mean? You can adjust your bottom baits. What I do with my bottom baits is I just pick colors that I think are going to work. I don't necessarily try to imitate a shad on my bottom bouncers, but on my crankbaits, that's what I'm exactly doing. This is imitating some type of herring or shad.
Pete says, "Hey, Matt, ask Frank what those clear sacks egg shape that I see attached to blowdowns. Those are frog eggs, aren't they?"
No, I don't know what I call them. Brains. I don't know what the hell they are.
I thought they were frog eggs.
No,
they turn into tadpoles.
They're gelatinous and they're hard. Yeah, they're gooey, but they're hard. Not frog eggs. I know what frog eggs are. Those are not frog eggs. They're gelatinous, gooey, and hard. And I know exactly what he's talking about, and I have absolutely no idea. But I could research it and find out.
Chase would like to know if threadfins ever intermingle with gizzard shad.
Sometimes their habitats overlap, but generally speaking, the gizzard shad and the threadfin have similar behaviors, which we'll get into when I do threadfin. Similar behaviors, but they also have some dissimilarities in them that keep them from merging, basically. But there's always times when certain bait fish, even bass, dude, let's talk about smallmouth, largemouth, and spotted bass. There's certain times of the year when you can have all three in a same fishing zone. Okay, bait fish are no different. It's just what they're doing for that time of year and what those conditions are. Just like fall migration for the blueback herring, if you have gizzard shad in the lake, you're gonna have gizzard shad and bluebacks intermixing.
Hold on.
That awkward silence.
Well, no, I'm blocking users is what I'm doing, Frank.
Uh-oh.
It's an exciting part of the job here. Topwater wise, we love to talk about topwaters. We've all seen the gizzard shad that are jumping out of the water with a bass behind them. The National Geographic stuff. I wish it happened more than it does.
Yes.
But are those fish that are pushing schools up, or are those gizzard shad that are on the surface that the fish are hunting? Like when do you go with the big topwaters?
Well, most of the time, when you see the bait fish across the top,
yeah, like a big one. I'm thinking of a specific instance. Arkansas River last year. I'm catching them on a drop shot. It's late summer.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a good bag. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, gizzard shad, 6-7 inches long, shoom out of the water, shoom out of the water. Then another one, shoom, and I'm on this rock pile offshore on the Arkansas River down in the Kerr Pool. And then like 2 or 3 4 to 5 pound bass. Now I'm catching 2.5 to 3 pounders. I'm freaking out, reaching for the rod. I've got a top. I mean, I get one cast in, doesn't happen, and they're gone and they never come back. And I spent hours and hours on that spot.
Yeah.
But I hadn't seen any gizzard shad flick in there. I was catching them on a drop shot and a little bitty crankbait out there. And then all of a sudden, here's some big gizzards. Here's some 4 or 5 pounders, which are monsters out there. And then it's gone.
Yeah, those were gizzards. Most of the time when you see shad flitting on top, a lot of times that's threadfin doing all that. They get up top and do.
But these were gizzards.
Yeah, those bigger ones are definitely gizzard shad. I have a tendency to have a super spook with me at all times when I'm fishing structure. I've seen it happen too many times. And if you've got fish pumping 7-inch gizzard shad out of the water, those are big bass, dude.
Yeah, they were huge.
Those are big.
So always have
bass.
one just in case they come up and they push them and start chasing. Have something at the ready to check.
Right, because the big bucktails used to be synonymous. We used to carry these big, giant, 5 and 6 inch bucktails, and when they'd come up school, and you fire the bucktail out there, and you just pump it back to the boat and catch them like that. But for the most part, I've always got a spook tied on, especially if I'm fishing cleaner lakes, cleaner water condition lakes, because they can see it farther away and they can come up and get it.
All right. Pete wants to know, what water temp do they quit spawning?
The gizzard shad's weird because generally it's May through June, and then they're done. I'm not 100% sure of the exact water temperature that they spawn on, but if you're seeing that kind of behavior, seeing shad behavior on those gradual sloping flats over, grass beds and stuff like that, that's the shad spawn. I'm trying to think. Oh, the other day I was out. Last week I was out, and I actually was catching gizzard shad.
In the mouth?
Yeah. They were smacking on my lure.
Oh, swimming up again.
Yeah, because they were trying to spawn with the jerk baits.
Why does the shad spawn usually die once you get a lot more light penetration? You have any idea on that? That's a question I've always wondered.
It's not that the shad spawn dies because there's more light penetration. It's just that, don't forget the sunlight drives the gizzard shad down.
So will they spawn all day? They'll just spawn out of sight?
They spawn. Yeah, I mean, they're random spawners. So when you snag them on your jerk baits, or you're snagging shad, they're banging into the side of the bait because that's their behavior. They bump each other. Eggs go down, males do his thing, eggs fall to the bottom, and that's how they do that, to get the ball rolling, so to speak. So, and knowing that the bright sunlight puts them down, they're still doing what they do. They're just going down in the water column.
Okay. What else you got?
Gizzard shad are easy, man. They're nowhere near as complicated as a blueback. Nowhere near.
Do you mess with the big swim baits like we've seen on Lake Fork that have become a lot more popular? Because it started out, listen, if you're from the West Coast, just put earplugs in. I'm talking about the normal everyday being bass.
Yeah, if you're come from the place that invented that crap,
okay, listen.
Ignore it.
Listen, I understand the Hinkle's been out for forever. It's 4 ounces. But as of recently, in the HPH, the high-powered hair, you're talking hundreds, $500-$600 baits on this stuff that were what I would call kind of the original
glide bait.
From my knowledge, like I said, I don't want to get inundated with, this was out in 2001.
Right, yeah.
The glide baits that were shad shaped, like they had the trout, and then they have the, like the negotiators, and those are just kind of generic bait fish shapes, the side swimmer 250s and 175s and all that. But over the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a lot more gizzard shad style of those glide baits out. There's 10 or 15 different versions of them that are out there now, made in 4 or 5 inches all the way up to 12 inches and weighing a pound. Have you messed with those at all, or is that a new horizon that just has not made its way to your vessel yet?
I don't have the patience for that. I really don't have the patience for it. So I don't fish them that often. I do fish occasionally some, bigger swim baits. Um, but I don't, it's not my strength. Let's put it that way. It's not a go-to for me. Um, I'll be throwing big crankbaits. And I know I'm missing out on some fish activity. And once I start playing around with forward facing sonar more, maybe I'll get more into that type of fishing. But I have a hard time committing to that. I think that's something you have to commit to when you're doing it for the day. You got to commit to that.
Mm-hmm. Real interesting question. Let me see right here. Any tricks on chasing bass that are keying on the shad when you're on lakes that have when you're on lakes that have stripers? That was more, I think, what the gist is of that. A lot of times you'll get this. This happens on Texoma a lot, right? I've had multiple tournaments on Texoma. You roll up and you're, in practice, you're catching smallmouth and largemouth, and you get there in the derby and it's stripers. Yeah, and they're mixed in. There's no way to target bass out of the stripers, is there?
Well, the problem is that bass will follow stripers too, and get the cripples that the stripers cripple and go below the stripers. The problem is getting a bait past the stripers and the hybrids.
Yeah, you have any tricks for that?
That's the problem. No, I don't. I mean, you're just fighting it out. You know what I mean? And if you're catching too many hybrids or stripers, you got to find some new fish to go catch, because it's hard to get through them. That's the problem. They're feeding actively also, and you have to get beneath them to catch the bass. And so it's a tough animal. I mean, there's times when the stripers, like if you get into a handful of hybrids or stripers busting on fish, it's easier to get through them. But if you're on a big school of them, you probably aren't going through them. I've never been able to do it with any consistency.
I had a time where I couldn't even. I remember it was on Keystone, that same lake. They used to have a ton of hybrid stripers in it. On a point, catching them on a swing head and a jig.
Mm-hmm.
Could not make a cast with it. I mean, we're catching them in 15 foot of water, dragging it on the bottom. Could not make a cast with it. The line would go down about 6 feet and start swimming off. It'd be a 6-pound hybrid on it. And we're talking a green pumpkin plastic on a 3/4 ounce.
Oh, yeah.
Wait, we literally had to move.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Hundreds of them. I mean, it's great if you're fun fishing. I mean, I've done it in practice where I'm like, well, not going to catch any bass for the next hour.
Exactly. I did the same thing on Murray. I got on the big stripers and I said, I'm not leaving.
That's so much fun.
It is. I'm not leaving till I can't catch another striper. And I had
at Cherokee this year.
Yeah, it's hard to pass them up. As a fisherman, we love and respect the animal. We love the game and we love to fish. So when you jump to a different food chain class, it's hard to leave.
That's the one thing about bass fishing. You think, boy, that fish put up a fight. But in all reality, we've geared this game towards execution, catch to land ratio, getting the fish from the water into the boat as quickly as possible.
Absolutely.
So even with a spinning rod, and I've noticed this, you catch a 6-pound smallmouth on a spinning rod, you are a minute and a half, 2 minutes.
Yeah, you're battling.
And it seems like 5 minutes, but you're actually fighting the fish. But very rarely in bass fishing do you fight a fish where you do not feel like you have the upper hand. And even when you do on a giant one, time, even if you're jacking a fish in Florida that's an 8 or 9 pounder, you're talking 20, 30 seconds. Even if you have to go down and belly it, very rarely. In bass fishing, freshwater, with what we do, and I understand it's different with sturgeon and muskie up there, but do you set the hook on a fish that you actually have to fight, and it's a give and take battle, and it's minutes and minutes and minutes? It's usually, a carp here or a big striper, and that's about it. But every time I hook one of those, or a big flathead, I forget the joy that there is in a battle. In a battle.
In the battle.
You fight this thing for 5 minutes and you still haven't seen it, and you're past the point of breaking it off. You know it's not a bass, but you're going, all right, I'm committed. I'm invested in this. I want to see what the heck this thing is.
100%, dude. I can't stand losing a giant fish. that's not a bass. I have to see what it is, and I have to get it in the boat because my thing is this, okay? I've never caught a sturgeon before, and fishing on Lake Erie all the time. Lake Erie has sturgeon in it, and I know from time to time bass guys will hook a sturgeon. Okay, Schwinkbeck caught about a 5-footer in Buffalo. Okay. So I know that happens. So when, especially on Lake Erie, when I'm fishing on Lake Erie and I got something that I can't handle, I get amped up, dude.
Because you're like, here's my sturgeon.
Yeah, I'm like, here we go. You know what I mean? And so, but I'll tell you a funny story. We catch a lot of inland stripers. And when we travel all over the country fishing Bassmasters, you go to Murray, you go to all these striper lakes, and they're inland stripers. Okay, they live in freshwater the whole time, and they fight great. I mean, they whoop your butt. When I was on the Chesapeake Bay, I was fishing a small grass and gravel bar. Okay, when this is the first time I ever seen the Chesapeake. And I put on a Cordell rattle spot, and I started through that. Dude, all of a sudden, man. And I was throwing it on 50-pound braid so I could snap it through the grass and not waste a cast. You know what I mean? And man alive, dude, that fish hit that thing, and I went to pull back on him, and there was no pulling back. I was on the front deck of my boat on my knees, and line was going out. And I'm like, holy smokes, like it almost burned through my finger, the braid.
Yeah.
I was like, holy crap, what do I got? You know what I mean? So now my heart's pounding, and I'm like, because there's ocean fish that run up the Chesapeake. So I'm like, I am not losing whatever this is because I don't know what it is. I'm thinking
bull shark.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All I know is that I can't handle this fish and it's whooping my ass. So I start running it down on the trolling motor. All right. It's everything I can do to keep this fish hooked up. So if I finally get to see it, and it is a Mugambo size ocean run striper. I mean, like, dude, from my belt buckle to the bottom of the floor of my boat, and his tail's been on the floor of my boat. It is a monster size. So I like a complete moron, okay, because it's a striper. They don't have teeth. I can grab them by the mouth. You know what I mean? This was before spot lock was invented. Winds blowing, tides moving, boats drifting. I'm wrestling this fish. I'm by myself. I'm wrestling this fish on the back deck of my boat, fighting him on the back deck because I got to get him where the boat's lowest to the water.
You're putting this thing in the boat at this point. It's coming in the boat. It's
coming in my boat. I don't have a net, so I have to be at the lowest point of that boat. So I'm literally on the back deck, and this fish is killing me. Okay, so I finally, and I don't know the timeline because you know how things go. You know, when it's happening, it's in like mega slow motion. So I see him, and that spot is literally implanted. One hook's in his mouth, the other hook is right by his cheek, and I got to grab the fish by the mouth. Okay, and I have to be careful because the hooks are at the opening of his mouth. He didn't choke on it. You know what I mean? So I reach down like a moron with one hand, I'm grabbing a bass, and I grab him by the mouth, and I try to lift him up into the boat with one hand, and this fish starts kicking, and it literally almost broke my wrist. I literally dropped him back into the water, and he takes off again for another, line burner. Well, I finally get him in the boat. I got him. I grabbed him with one hand by the mouth. I threw my rod in the bottom of the boat, grabbed him with both hands, and slid him up on the back deck of the dude. It was a monster. I mean, its girth. It was a monster size striper.
Right out of the ocean.
Yeah, right out of the ocean. I have nobody with me. Okay, so I'm like, holy crap. So I drop him in the hole of my boat. I'm taking pictures of him, and it's like, oh my God, this is the biggest striper on earth. You know what I mean? And so I unhook him, and then I let him go. And when I look at the pictures, they were so stupid, dude. It's like I'm standing on the boat looking down on this All I
You
got
can't
is
tell
like,
how big it is.
you can't tell nothing on it. I was so mad. I was like, of all the times not to have somebody in the boat with me, because I wanted one of those where you're
Yeah.
holding them up and the belly's all
Yeah.
down here,
Like a Larry Dahlberg photo,
Yeah,
the hunt for big fish.
exactly. And I swear to God, dude, that fish hit so hard and I had my, I had my finger by the braided line, and when that fish hit and I set the hook, that braided line immediately went right into my finger.
Yeah,
And
that's the worst.
oh my God. And I mean, I was on my knees in 2 seconds flat because I couldn't stop them. But yeah, dude, God, I love that.
You mentioned on Erie, like when you hook one that you can't. Is it? Troy mentioned it. Is that usually a drum? Like, what else can you hook on Erie that takes besides a sturgeon or a
Cats,
drum?
big giant cats, dude.
Oh, there's catfish on Erie like
Oh
that, huh?
my gosh, humongous
Channels,
cats.
blues, flats.
Channels and blues. We don't have flatheads in Lake
Okay,
Erie.
but
Not that I know of.
I didn't know that they got that big out there.
Dude, pigs, like 30 pounders. Pigs.
We'll eat a tube or a drop shot or
Smoke
anything.
the crap out of them, dude. Yeah, I mean,
What about salmon and stuff? You ever hook one of those things out
oh
there?
yeah, well yeah, but on purpose.
No, you never hook them like bass fishing.
Yeah, every now and then you will. If you're cranking or if you're even drop shotting, if you're using a shiner style drop shot bait, yeah, absolutely.
Will those take
Absolutely.
you for a run, or can you handle those?
Yeah, but you kind of know immediately, especially if it's a big steelhead, it comes straight to the top like a missile.
Oh,
Like,
really?
yeah, you hook it, dude, and your line just starts going slack, and you're like, holy crap, out comes this big chrome thing. It's pretty cool.
You don't have to mess with muskies very often out there, right? Or at all?
No, but we have them out there, and I have caught them out there. Most of our inland lakes, the muskies will give you fits.
Usually in Oklahoma, it's either flathead or you've snagged a grass carp.
Yeah. Well, a gar, you guys got gar, but you don't have alligator gar. You got to be more in Texas for the alligator.
No,
gar.
there's alligator gar. There's alligator gar. I mean, I caught one that I had to lasso with Mark out of 10 killer.
Sweet.
It was right after the Zona show came out where he had gone down to the river in Texas.
Oh God Almighty!
And you know how they lasso them
Yeah.
with the rope?
Oh yeah.
And I hooked this one right in the side of the head, and it came up and did the tarpon jump.
Which is
And
so awesome.
Surprisingly, Mark was like, dude, we need a picture with that. And it was about a 80-pounder.
Nice.
And probably 50. In all honesty, probably 50-pounder. It looked like an 80-pounder. I mean, it was 5 foot. I got the Larry Dahlberg picture. I've got the picture with it. But anyway, he was like, dude, we got to get a picture with this. And I'm fighting it, and it comes up, and I said, dude, I just watched the Zona show. I said, get your boat rope out that you tie off. And he's like, huh? And I was like, make a lasso. I said, I'll swim it through the lasso. I said, and then you nail him. And we did it, and it worked, and we got him in the boat, and I got the giant picture with her, and we tossed her back.
That's so cool.
But I also had another one on 10 killer where I hooked one on a crankbait. I was live on Instagram for 19 minutes fighting this thing, and it was a 35-pound grass carp hooked in the back dorsal fin, the absolute worst, where you couldn't.
Oh,
move
you
them.
can't. You have.
But
no
I had my
chance.
forward-facing sonar, and I got it out over 30 foot of water, and I could point it at it and see it. And I mean, dude, this thing on the screen is just mass. You can watch it fighting, and that's how I knew
so
it was
cool.
foul hooked, because I would
because
see it come in, and I could almost see the head, and then I could see the tail go down, but it was always coming in backwards and then going forwards. It wasn't, swimming around, but I ended up getting that in. But that's kind of the extent of the quote unquote cool species that you.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's like when I fish with my buddy Troy all the time. Whenever we catch something or hook something that's not a bass, we have two things. A, it's got to get in the boat, and B, we have to get a photograph. And that's the deal. I mean, we went one time to do nothing but catch carp. And we went into a hot water discharge, and we were throwing little grubs on them, and I soak them with anise oil because carp have a sweet tooth. Soak them with anise oil, and we would plaster
Like the orange ones?
Oh my God, dude, these carp are so big that when you lift them out of the water, their eyeballs pop out. I mean, they're huge. I mean, and we did that all the time. I mean, we go after stuff. Troy and I drove to Kentucky Lake when we were kids. I say kids, we were way green into the tournament game. And remember Fish Formula?
No.
Okay, Fish Formula was this fish scent you sprayed on your lures, and they had some with metal flake in it. So when it would hit the water, the little flake would leach
Okay.
off and it looked like scales, all the stuff. And so we went to do a Fish Formula tournament on Kentucky Lake, and we were young. Okay. And so we get down there and it's late and we're walking around on the docks and we see all these long nosed gar everywhere. So we're like, dude, we got to go catch those. And so we wound up gar fishing all night long, catching all these giant gar, and literally probably slept for an hour before we got up to go actually bass fishing. But that's the kind of stuff that
That's just
him and I
fishing
do.
for the joy of it, for
Like
catching the fish. I
100%.
do that up at hell. We'll just keep telling stories on it. Talk
Yeah,
about
I
stuff
mean,
you
why
can't
not?
move. Up in Alaska, when on the Kenai, there's like a season for the kings, right? And they're
Oh
going
yeah.
up there. But then we're back drifting with a bead for rainbows,
Hmm.
and the kings don't eat. They sit there with their mouths and something pisses them off, and they swing their head and you hook them on a. Anyway, every once in a while, and I didn't know this, one of those beads will swing past down there.
Well, the
Yeah,
line
it
goes
gets through the line.
right.
So we were out there, and I'm snagged.
And you're like,
I mean, it's not moving at all. We're fishing big rainbows, and you come back up, and it's a weird color. Anyway, dude, it's like a freaking 80-pound king salmon down there.
that's
And
so
Owen's
excellent.
like, break it off. And I'm like, no, I'm not breaking this thing off. And he's
I'm
like,
touching it.
legally, you have to. He's like, it's out of season. We can't mess with these things. Like, it's a ticket if you're seen like fighting them because it like stresses them out. So I had to break it off.
Yeah, see, I'm taking my chances with the ticket until I can touch that fish.
There was zero chance I would have been. I mean, we were throwing like 10-pound test
Yeah.
tippet on like a 9-foot spinning rod with it. I mean, there's zero. I mean, literally, the fish had absolutely no clue that there was anything wrong with the
Yeah,
scenario.
he's like, what's got me?
He didn't even know that. He's
I
just sitting
know.
down there.
That's so fantastic. Yeah, I've done some crazy stuff. Sometimes I just like catching really big fish and I don't care what it is. I
Oh,
will
spoonbill. Spoonbill, too. I've
I
told that
never
story.
got a
Haven't I told you
spoonbill.
that story?
No.
Fort
Did you
Gibson,
like
BFL.
a legitimate catch or a snag?
Oh, no. I'm sure it was snag, but Fort Gibson, BFL, in 2013, last hour of practice, I sling a 3/4 ounce trap across a shallow rock hump. I mean, it only comes up to 3 foot and catch a 5-pounder. And I cast back out and I catch a 3-pounder. And I'm like, well, I know where I'm starting. So I roll back there next morning. First cast, jump off a keeper. Second cast, have another one that comes off. Third cast, get the net. Biggin. And it comes up next to the boat. And I said, don't jump. And I've got it on a cranking rod. And it jumps. And it's like a 60-pound spoonbill hooked in the side of the head. I mean, like shamu'd, like to the point where we both went, whoa.
Did you get him?
Well, I'm in the tournament, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I think I was throwing 10-pound. Don't ask me why. I know I was throwing 10-pound tests because I was like, dude,
On
this
a rattle bait?
Don't ask what was going on.
I'm not going to ask.
I wanted a long cast, and that's why I was
I'm not
throwing the
asking
crank in.
you.
Anyway, I was like, this could be a line class state record spoonbill.
Could be.
So I fight it for probably 5 minutes, and it starts, I'm following it with the little ZX 190, and it gets out in the middle of the lake, and then some other guy goes and stops on the point that I had been fishing, and like I've got a co-angler, and I winch the drag down, and eventually,
and then,
yeah,
God,
broke it
dude,
off.
I
But
never
that was
got a
like the
spoonbill.
coolest thing because it was like 10 feet from the boat, and it came completely out of the water.
That's fantastic. Never got a spoonbill, never got a sturgeon. But I never really fished for either. Okay. Now I know spoonbills are plankton eaters, so whatever. But I never fished for sturgeon on purpose. I've caught alligator gar on purpose. Um, Fly fishing. Now I've had some great fly fishing stuff happen to me in the ocean. I was fly fishing um, down by Captiva, Pine Island Sound area,
Hmm.
and I was beating the speckled trout to death. Like it was like my mission, okay? And catching pompano in the mix, some nice ladyfish, whatever. So I get the fly out past the eelgrass line, and it's tide's coming and going out, and I'm swinging it in the tide, you know. So I let the fly swim in the tide, and all of a sudden, boom, and I'm palming that fly reel, and this thing is going. I'm into the backing, and this thing is going, and I'm like, holy smokes, man! I'm gonna lose, you know, $100 worth of fly line and backing if this I don't get this fish. So I'm putting the brakes on. All of a sudden, this fish turns around and he's starting to come at me. Now I'm reeling like a crazy man. And if you know fly reels, dude, it's like 1-to-1. So, yes, and I have a large arbor spool, so I can pick up some line. Dude, I'm reeling like a maniac, and this thing's coming right at me. All of a sudden, he turns and goes the other way, and all of a sudden, it's like, out he goes. Dude, it comes flying out of the water. It's a big ray like a bird, dude, flying out of the water. I'm like, oh my God, I gotta land this thing. So now I'm like, I gotta land this. You know what I mean? So I did, dude. I snagged him right on the top of the back of the head, and I landed this thing. And I got him on the beach, and I'm like, he's in shallow enough water where I could, you know,
Manipulate
him and stuff. And I got my pliers and I grabbed the fly and popped the fly out of his. Dude, this ray was gigantic. Okay, so now I'm like, God, I want to snag another one so bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm with Frankie, right? And I see a boil. I'm like making a cast, and I see the boil to my side. I see a big boil, so I don't let the cast hit the water. I do another back cast. I change direction. I go right on top of the boil. I start to strip the fly, and it stops dead in its tracks. And I freaking hammer back, dude. Strip set. I got him, and it's moving. I go, dude, I got him. I said, oh my God, this is giant. And I got him. I said, maybe I got my first tarpon. You know what I mean? What do I know? And it's going, and it's going. And I'm like, what the hell? It's humongous. Okay. So I pick up my slack. I got him I got him to the reel, and it's doing like that stuff, dude. It comes up. I snagged I snagged what do you call them things? They look like walruses.
You snagged a manatee?
Right in the top of the head, dude.
I don't know if you're legally allowed to tell that story, Frank.
I didn't do it on purpose.
I know.
Dude, it comes up, and it's like got the mustache, you know, spits the water out, and my clouser minnow's right on its head. So I'm like, holy smokes, this thing doesn't even know there's a hook in it. So I start reeling up, and I'm walking to it. I get right like, 9 feet away, because that's how long my fly rod is. And I pull the line like this, and I get right to the clouser minnow, and I go blink right out of its head, and he's just like this with his head out of the water with that big thick mustache, man.
Oh my God.
My Frankie goes, oh, you sure got him, Dad. But I consider that a land. I consider that land.
Yeah.
You know
saltwater, I think, isn't it? If you touch the leader or something, it's considered a catch.
I consider that a catch, dude. That was the biggest thing I ever caught.
You ever been spooled on anything fresh or salt where you hook something, you say, I've got it, and it literally just goes zzz, all the way and is gone, and you're like, what?
Yeah. Fly fishing in saltwater. I hooked up with something. I was stripping that fly in, and bam, and I go, strip set it, and I couldn't even hold the line, dude. It just went right through my hand. I was on the reel, and it's this thing, and I watched all my backing and everything go, bink, gone.
What do you think it was?
I have no clue. Dude, it could have been anything, because it could have been anything. I have no clue what it was. But it was like a rocket ship. Like that spool was spinning so fast that it freaked me out how fast that spool was spinning. I said,
Never in
well,
freshwater?
never in freshwater, dude. Never.
I
in
don't think I've ever
freshwater.
been completely spooled in freshwater.
No, that's what I tell everybody. If something spools you, you're not fishing in freshwater. Either that or you don't know how to fight a fish.
Mm-hmm.
Or you hook the back of somebody's boat.
Or a manatee.
Yeah, or a manatee. No, but the manatee was in the ocean, dude.
Yeah.
It wasn't in the freshwater, which is really bizarre to me. But
I guess some of those Florida lakes you can catch tarpon, like out of Okeechobee. And...
yeah, juveniles. They go
Oh,
in there.
the closest I've come to being spooled was salt too. I was out with Gerald Spoor at on the Delta out there at Venice, and we were catching those big giant reds.
Oh yeah,
on square bills, and like you had, it was using a flipping stick and 25-pound fluoro casting it, but I mean they still, a 25-pound bull red just goes wherever it wants to, and he would have to go track them all down, or else it would have spooled us. But yeah, saltwater.
Saltwater's so much fun.
And then one time we hooked one and something was trying to eat it.
Oh yeah.
Then you're like, okay, let's not fall in the ocean here.
Okay, the one thing you never hear anybody that fishes saltwater ever say, I think I got one. When you're bass fishing, you go, dude, I think I got him. Yeah. You never hear that in saltwater because you
either don't have one or it's chaos.
Yeah, it's instantaneous, rods out of your hand. Holy shit, what am I going to do? It's big. You know what I mean? You never hear that in saltwater. I mean,
man, you're making me want to go saltwater fishing now.
Dude, I swear to God, if I lived there, I think I'd be a problem child.
I've done the oil rigs one time, and it's like a 20% land ratio.
Oh my god!
Like you hook one of those grouper down there.
Yeah, and it's like,
and no one moves in the boat, and you're like, I got a big one, and they're like, yeah, no, we know, we see it. And you're like, well, are you gonna like get ready to land it?
No, you're not even
absolutely
close.
Not, because you're not gonna land that.
Yeah.
Really? And you get it out, and then it just, and you're like gonna break the rod over the side of the boat, and then it's into the rig, and
you're done. Yeah,
gone.
You can't turn them big fish, dude. It's so much fun. I think didn't Zona do a show catching sharks flipping docks
with Hackney?
Maybe they were catching sharks flipping docks, dude.
He also did the deal with catching kings and browns jerk baiting in Milwaukee.
But that's very normal.
It is. I went there one time. I was on the way back from the Angler of the Year tournament and went through Milwaukee, and I was like, remembered that show. So I just went to like the harbor there, and no joke, there were freaking salmon and brown trout and stuff like swimming. Like I'm just walking on the bank looking, and they're like 20, 30, 40 pounders just swimming around in the marina.
Yeah, it was
so sweet. I mean, I didn't have any rods, reels, nothing, but it was absolutely incredible.
It
looked like an aquarium, and it's in downtown Milwaukee.
Yeah, Chicago's like that too. Downtown Chicago gets like that. It's fantastic. I wish that I could. I want to fish for all kinds of different species of fish, and I do, but I can't film that stuff.
It is. I just wish you had 2 weeks to just go.
Yeah.
Do whatever at the right time. Because a lot of this stuff that we're talking about, it's not a 365, 12 months out of the year. It's a very specific, hey, they're here doing this these 3 weeks or this month.
Correct. Gosh, I want to do videos catching everything I can possibly catch. And I think I might. I just, man. Dude, I just love fishing so bad. I can't stand it.
I don't know how we went from
Gizzard Shad
to that, but it was entertaining.
That's a good show. Remember, guys, Bass Talk, Capital Bass Talk, 15% off, ends in 4 days. You got to take advantage of it. The bulk bundles are already discounted, but you know all that from 20 minutes ago. Check out the Yum Custom Dinger colors. Some of those colors are just flat out money.
Good stuff, Frank. Thanks for sticking with us. This has been day 4, number 68, with the man, Frank Scalish.
Outstanding.
We'll see you next week.
Adios.